Parents broke into my safe to steal 30K for golden siblings' engagement party. When great-grandfather asked about his fortune, they were shocked and had no idea where to find that money. Let me start by saying this story is absolutely wild, and I'm still processing everything that went down. I need to get this off my chest about how my spoiled, gold-digging sister literally destroyed our entire family over her wedding, and how karma came back to bite her harder than I ever could have imagined. Fair warning, this gets pretty intense towards the end, but trust me, she had it coming. Grab some popcorn because this is going to be a long one, but I promise it's worth reading until the very last word. My name is Derek, I'm 29 years old, male, and I've been basically the sole provider for my family since I was 20. I work as an HVAC technician, started as an apprentice right out of high school, and worked my way up through journeyman level. Now I run my own small HVAC business doing both residential and commercial work. It's demanding work with long hours, especially during the peak summer and winter seasons. But the money's solid when you stay busy and build a good reputation in the community. I live with my parents, Robert, 58 male, and Carol, 57 female, plus my sister Brittany, 25 female, in this old two-story house that my dad inherited from his brother about 13 years ago. When I say I support everyone, I mean literally everything. Mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, car insurance, property taxes, home repairs, you name it. And it comes out of my paycheck. I've become the de facto head of household financially, even though I'm the youngest adult in the house. Here's some background on why this situation is so completely messed up and how I ended up in this position. My dad, Robert, used to work at the local auto parts factory until it closed down about 8 years ago. Instead of finding another job or even seriously looking for work, he decided he was done with the working world entirely. Now he spends his days watching sports on TV, playing video games, and complaining endlessly about how the economy screwed him over and how it's impossible for someone his age to find decent work. My mom, Carol, works part-time at a department store making barely $280 a week. That doesn't even come close to covering groceries for 4 people, let alone any of the other household expenses. She's always talking about picking up more hours, but somehow it never actually happens. She seems content letting me handle all the financial responsibilities while she focuses on what she calls keeping the house running, which apparently means doing laundry and cooking dinner most nights. Then there's Brittany. Oh boy, where do I even start with this piece of work? She's never held a real job in her entire life. After high school, she went to community college for about a semester, which I paid for, by the way, before dropping out because it was too stressful and not the right fit for her learning style. Since then, she's been living like an absolute princess. She sleeps until noon most days, spends hours on social media posting carefully curated photos of her blessed life, goes shopping with money she doesn't have, and dates a string of guys who all seem to have one thing in common. They're loaded. The girl is a straight-up gold digger, and I've watched her cycle through boyfriends based purely on their bank accounts and what they can provide for her. There was Connor, who worked in real estate and drove a nice car. She dated him for about 6 months, until she found out he was leasing his Audi instead of owning it outright. Then came Brad, who owned a small restaurant downtown. That relationship lasted until she discovered he was drowning in debt from the business and barely making ends meet. She's always got some scheme or plan to find a rich guy who will take care of her and give her the lifestyle she thinks she deserves. What really gets to me is how my parents completely enable her behavior. They act like she's some delicate flower who can't handle the stress and responsibility of real work. Brittany is special, Mom always says with this dreamy look in her eyes. She just needs to find the right opportunity. The right opportunity? She's 25 years old. Meanwhile, I'm up at 5:30 a.m. every single day, working in all kinds of weather, blazing hot attics in summer, freezing cold basements in winter, crawling through spaces that would make most people claustrophobic. Also, everyone in this house can live comfortably. I make decent money, averaging around $4,200 per month when business is good. But with the mortgage payment at $1,950, utilities running about $320, groceries costing around $650 for 4 people, insurance at $420, and all the other random house expenses that constantly pop up, I'm lucky if I have $480 left over for myself at the end of each month. I drive a 2012 pickup truck with 195,000 miles on it because I can't afford anything newer. I haven't taken a real vacation in 7 years. But did I complain? Nope. Because I thought family came first, and I thought I was doing the right thing by being the responsible one. I thought that eventually, they'd appreciate what I was doing for them, or at least acknowledge the sacrifices I was making. Looking back now, I realize how incredibly wrong I was, and it's not even funny how naive I had been. The worst part is how they treat me like I'm being overly dramatic when I come home exhausted from work. Like, sorry I don't have energy to chat and hang out after working since 5:30 in the morning and dealing with difficult customers all day. But someone's got to pay for the roof over your heads. When I come home tired and covered in dust from crawling through some nasty crawl space or attic, Brittany will make snide comments about how I smell like work and maybe I should shower before sitting down for dinner. The audacity of someone who's never worked a day in her life to criticize how I smell after providing for her is just mind-blowing. My parents have developed this attitude like I somehow owe them this lifestyle. Dad will say things like, "Well, you're living here too, Derek," as if I'm getting some incredible deal out of this arrangement. He completely ignores the fact that I'm paying for literally everything while he sits on his ass all day. Mom treats me more like a roommate who happens to pay all the bills rather than her son, who's sacrificing his own future and financial security for their comfort and stability. But Brittany is absolutely the worst of all of them. She acts like my financial support is just the natural order of things, like I'm some kind of ATM machine that exists solely to fund her lifestyle and make her dreams come true. She'll casually ask me to drive her places because her car is making a weird noise, but never offers gas money or even a thank you. She'll eat the food I buy, using up ingredients I specifically bought for my own meals, without ever contributing a single dollar toward groceries. She'll leave lights on all over the house and run the air conditioning constantly because it's too hot, completely oblivious to the fact that I'm the one paying the electric bill that jumps up by 100+ during summer months. What makes it even more frustrating is watching her social media presence. She's constantly posting about being blessed and living her best life, while never once mentioning that her best life is funded entirely by her brother's hard work and long hours. She'll post pictures of new clothes, expensive makeup, fancy coffee drinks from trendy cafes, all bought with money she didn't earn. The captions are always something like, "Grateful for this beautiful life," or "So blessed to be surrounded by love." But there's never any acknowledgement of where the money actually comes from. I kept telling myself that this situation was temporary, that eventually Dad would swallow his pride and find work again, or Brittany would grow up and get a real job, or at the very least they'd show some genuine appreciation for what I was doing. I held on to the hope that family meant something more than just being a reliable source of money, and that deep down they understood the sacrifices I was making. That hope was about to get crushed in the worst possible way. Everything changed when Brittany started dating Brandon Clearwater back in April. This 30-year-old investment advisor was completely different from her usual targets, and I could tell from the moment she brought him around that this guy was serious money. He drove a sleek BMW, lived in a fancy downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows, and was clearly loaded in a way that made her previous boyfriends look like they were playing with pocket change. More importantly, for Brittany's purposes, he seemed genuinely interested in my sister and not just looking for a casual fling. Now, I'll give credit where it's due. Brittany is attractive. She's got that Instagram model look down pat, always perfectly dressed with her makeup on point and her hairstyle just right. But she's not exactly the brightest bulb in the chandelier, and her personality has all the depth and warmth of wet cardboard. Unless, of course, she's actively manipulating someone to get what she wants. Within just 3 weeks of dating Brandon, Brittany's whole attitude and demeanor shifted dramatically. She started acting like she was already rich, casually dropping comments about when Brandon and I move in together, and talking about expensive restaurants like she'd been dining at them her whole life. She even quit her part-time retail job at the mall because, as she put it, Brandon doesn't think his girlfriend should be working in some trashy retail store. It's beneath the kind of woman he wants to be with. My parents absolutely ate this up with a spoon. Dad started bragging to anyone who would listen about his daughter dating such a successful businessman, going on and on about Brandon's career and how well he was doing financially. Mom treated Brittany like absolute royalty, doing her laundry without being asked, making special meals just for her, and basically waiting on her hand and foot like she was some kind of princess. The level of attention and praise they showered on her for simply landing a rich boyfriend was honestly disgusting to watch. I observed this whole situation unfold with growing irritation and resentment. Here I was, still paying for everything in the house, every single bill, every grocery run, every unexpected expense, while Brittany got celebrity treatment for doing nothing more than dating someone with money. But I kept my mouth shut and tried to stay out of it, secretly hoping that maybe Brandon would propose soon and take her off my hands financially. At least then she'd become his problem instead of mine. That peaceful resolution lasted exactly 3 months. In July, Brittany practically bounced into the house one evening, waving around this massive engagement ring that had to be at least 3 carats and probably worth more than I make in 5 months of grueling work. "We're engaged!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing through the entire house. My parents went absolutely insane with excitement. Mom immediately burst into happy tears. Dad jumped up from his recliner to hug her, and they were both acting like she'd just won the lottery or cured cancer. The noise level in that house was unbelievable. Everyone talking and laughing and celebrating at the same time. I have to admit, my first thought was, great, maybe now she'll finally move out and become Brandon's financial responsibility. Brittany was absolutely glowing as she showed off the ring from every possible angle, describing Brandon's elaborate proposal at some fancy restaurant complete with a string quartet and rose petals scattered around their table. She immediately started taking selfies with the ring, posting them to social media with captions like, "He said yes, now planning the wedding of my dreams." Blessed or engaged life. Dreams come true. "So when's the big day?" Mom asked, still wiping tears of joy from her eyes. "Next spring, when the azaleas are in full bloom," Brittany replied dreamily. "Everything will be absolutely perfect." But then her expression suddenly turned calculating, and I felt that familiar knot forming in my stomach. The same feeling I got whenever I sensed she was about to ask for something expensive. "We need to talk about the wedding budget," she said, and I noticed how her eyes glanced directly at me when she said it. "Brandon's being incredibly generous," she continued, her voice taking on that rehearsed quality that told me she'd been practicing this speech. "He's handling the honeymoon deposits. We're going to Costa Rica for 3 weeks at $750 per night. Can you believe it?" The room went completely quiet as we all processed that number. And we found the absolutely perfect venue, Lakeside Country Club. It has this gorgeous ballroom that fits exactly 180 people, with these stunning views of the water. She was talking faster now, clearly nervous but trying to maintain her excitement. "With the catering, live band, open bar, professional photographer, videographer, flowers, and my dress. Oh my god, you should see the dress I picked out. It's like something from a fairy tale." She paused for dramatic effect, looking around the room at all of us. Brandon's family is being wonderful and handling the rehearsal dinner at their country club, but traditionally, the bride's family covers the actual wedding ceremony and reception. Another pause. I could practically hear my heartbeat in the silence. "We've calculated everything very carefully and we need $48,000. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that house. Then, like something out of a horror movie, 3 pairs of eyes slowly turned toward me like I was a walking ATM machine with legs. $48,000, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. I was sure I had misheard her. "I know it sounds like a lot," Brittany said quickly, her voice taking on that wheedling tone she used when she wanted something expensive. "But this is once in a lifetime, Derek. This is my wedding day, every girl's most important day. And Brandon's family has serious money. They'll think we're completely trashy if we can't afford a proper wedding that matches their social status." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with desperation disguised as excitement. "Plus, you make really good money and you've been living here rent-free for years. It's not like you have any real expenses. Rent-free?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The words came out louder than I intended, and I could feel my face getting hot with anger. "Brittany, I pay the mortgage. I pay for literally everything in this house. Every single bill, every grocery trip, every utility payment." That's when Brittany showed her true colors, and I saw a side of my sister I'd never witnessed before. Her expression shifted from disappointed puppy dog to something genuinely ugly, entitled, demanding, and manipulative in a way that made my skin crawl. "I can't believe you're being so incredibly selfish," she whined, her voice taking on this high-pitched, victimized tone. "This is the most important day of my entire life, Derek. Brandon's family has serious money. Like, serious money. They'll judge our entire family if we can't afford a proper wedding. Do you want them to think we're some kind of trashy, low-class people who can't take care of their own daughter? Then maybe you should have thought about that before saying yes to a wedding that costs more than most people spend on their cars," I shot back, my voice shaking with 9 years of built-up resentment. Don't you dare. Mom suddenly jumped into the conversation, her voice shrill and defensive. Your sister deserves happiness, Derek. If you really cared about this family, you'd help make her dreams come true instead of being so stingy with money that isn't even really yours anyway. Help make her dreams come true? I stood up from the couch, feeling 9 years of suppressed anger and frustration boiling over like a volcano. I've been making everyone's dreams come true for nearly a decade. I pay for this house, the food you eat, the electricity you're using right now to have this conversation. When's the last time any of you thanked me for any of it? When's the last time Brittany contributed even a single dollar to anything? Brittany rolled her eyes dramatically, like I was some kind of child having a tantrum. Here we go with the martyr complex again, she said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. Nobody forced you to pay for everything, Derek. You chose to do that. That was your decision. That comment hit me like a physical slap across the face. I couldn't believe the audacity of what she'd just said. I chose to? My voice was getting louder now, and I didn't care who heard me. What exactly was the alternative, Brittany? Let us all become homeless? Let the family fall apart completely when Dad decided he was too good to work anymore? Watch your mouth, boy, Dad growled, standing up from his chair with that threatening posture he used to use when I was a teenager. I worked for 28 years at that plant before it closed down. I put in my time, paid my dues. I deserve to retire at 58 and enjoy what's left of my life. While your son works himself to death supporting your early retirement? I was seeing red now, all the years of resentment and frustration pouring out at once. And what's Brittany's excuse for never working? She's 25 years old. I don't need to work, Brittany snapped back, her voice dripping with smugness. Brandon takes care of me now. Unlike some people in this room, I was smart enough to find a man who can actually provide for his woman. The way she looked at me when she said it, like I was some kind of failure for actually working for a living, made me want to scream. That's when I realized my sister wasn't just spoiled or entitled. She was genuinely a terrible person with no empathy or conscience whatsoever. You know what, Brittany? You're absolutely right. Brandon can provide for you. So ask your rich fiancé to pay for the wedding instead of expecting your family to go into crushing debt for your fairy tale day. She actually laughed at me. A cold, cruel sound that I'll never forget. Brandon's already paying for the honeymoon, Derek. The bride's family pays for the wedding. That's tradition, and that's how it works in civilized society. Then scale it down to something we can actually afford, I said, trying to keep my voice reasonable despite the rage building inside me. Absolutely not. Her voice went ice cold, and I saw something in her expression that genuinely chilled me to the bone. I'm not having some cheap, embarrassing wedding because my brother is too selfish to help his own family. What would Brandon's parents think? What would all their friends and business associates think when they see some bargain basement reception? Maybe they should wonder what kind of family they're marrying into, I said quietly, my voice barely controlled. One where a 25-year-old has never worked a day in her life and expects her brother to fund her fantasy wedding. How dare you say that? Mom gasped, pressing her hand to her chest like I'd physically attacked her. Brittany is sweet and loving and kind. She's always been the heart of this family. Sweet and loving? I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. When's the last time she said thank you for anything? When's the last time she showed any appreciation whatsoever for my 65-hour work weeks so she can sleep until noon every day? Brittany stood up abruptly, putting her hands on her hips in that defiant pose she'd perfected over the years. We gave you a place to live, Derek. We let you stay here when you could have gotten your own apartment years ago. You let me stay here? My voice cracked with disbelief. In the house that I pay for? I could absolutely afford my own place if I wasn't supporting 3 fully grown adults who refuse to take care of themselves. Well, maybe you should just move out then, she shouted, her face red with anger. Stop trying to control everyone with your money. Nobody's forcing you to live here. The shouting match that followed lasted nearly 3 hours. Brittany cried crocodile tears about me ruining her life and destroying her dreams. My parents called me selfish, ungrateful, and heartless. They conveniently forgot that I'd been supporting them financially for nearly a decade, sacrificing my own future and happiness for their comfort and security. I finally retreated to my room around midnight, emotionally drained and furious, listening through the thin walls to their angry whispers in the living room. I could hear bits and pieces. So disappointed in him, thought we raised him better than this. Brittany deserves so much better than this treatment. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd somehow become the villain in this story for refusing to go into crushing debt for a wedding that cost more than most people's annual salary. How had I become the bad guy for working my ass off to support everyone while they lived comfortable, carefree lives? What I didn't know at the time was that they weren't done fighting. They were just getting started, and they were willing to go much further than I ever could have imagined to get what they wanted from me. The next few weeks were absolute torture, like living in a psychological warfare zone. Brittany went into full manipulation mode, pulling out every trick in her extensive playbook. She alternated between crying fits, guilt trips, and recruiting extended family members to pressure me into changing my mind. The crying sessions were particularly dramatic. She'd break down sobbing whenever I was around, talking about how her dreams were being shattered and how she'd never forgive herself if she had to have some pathetic budget wedding that would embarrass Brandon's family. My Aunt Patricia called me 4 separate times, asking why I was being so mean to poor Brittany during what should be the happiest time in her life. My cousin Danny sent me multiple texts saying that my refusal to help with the wedding was really messed up, and that family should always come first. Even my Uncle Stephen made the effort to stop by one of my work sites, pulling me aside to ask if I was having money problems and needed help figuring out how to support my sister properly. What made it all so much worse was that Brittany had spun the story to make herself look like the innocent victim, and me like some heartless monster. She conveniently left out the $48,000 price tag and the fact that I'd been supporting the entire household for years. According to her carefully crafted version of events, I was just being selfish and jealous of her happiness, refusing to help my own sister on her special day for no good reason. But the absolute worst part was watching my parents' behavior toward me. They went from merely disappointed to actively hostile, treating me like I was some kind of stranger who had invaded their home. Dad started making snide comments whenever I was around, saying things like, "Must be nice to only care about yourself," or "Some people just don't understand what family means." Mom developed this passive-aggressive routine where she'd forget to make dinner for me, so I'd come home exhausted from a 12-hour workday to find that everyone had already eaten and there was nothing left. When I'd ask about it, she'd claim she didn't know what time I'd be home, despite my schedule being virtually identical for years. They treated me like I was completely unwelcome in the house that I was paying for. When I'd try to watch TV in the living room after work, they'd change the channel without asking or start having loud conversations about wedding plans, making it crystal clear that I wasn't wanted in the conversation. They'd schedule important family discussions and pointedly exclude me, then act surprised when I didn't know about decisions they'd made. Meanwhile, Brittany ramped up her social media game to an almost manic level. She was posting constantly about wedding planning, using hashtags like Brittany's Dream Wedding and Blessed Bride. She'd share pictures of expensive decorations, designer dresses that cost more than my monthly income, and elaborate centerpiece ideas. She made videos talking about how blessed she was to be marrying Brandon, but never once mentioned that she expected someone else to pay for the entire celebration. She also started treating me like I was her personal servant in the house. She'd leave messes everywhere, knowing I'd eventually clean them up. She'd use up all the hot water right before I needed a shower after work, leaving me with ice-cold water to wash off the sweat and grime from crawling through attics all day. She'd blast music late at night when she knew I had to be up early for work. When I complained about any of this behavior, she'd give me this sweet, innocent smile and say, "Maybe if you were more supportive of my wedding, I'd be more considerate of your needs." She started bringing Brandon around the house more frequently, and I could tell she was making subtle comments to him about how disappointing it was when family members weren't being supportive. How heartbreaking it was when people prioritized money over love and happiness. Brandon seemed uncomfortable during these conversations, but Brittany would just smile sweetly and change the subject, leaving him with the impression that there was some kind of serious family drama happening that he didn't fully understand. Then, 4 weeks after our initial confrontation, Dad came home with news that made my blood run absolutely cold. "I've got some good news," he announced with this triumphant smile on his face. "I talked to my buddy Jim down at the auto parts store, and he's willing to loan us $27,000 for Brittany's wedding. Problem solved." Brittany squealed with delight and threw her arms around Dad's neck, hugging him like he'd just saved her life. I felt like someone had punched me directly in the gut, knocking all the air out of my lungs. "Dad," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, "how exactly are you planning to pay back $27,000? He waved his hand dismissively like I was asking about something completely trivial. We'll figure it out as we go. Family comes first, Derek. That's what matters here. We'll figure it out? My voice was getting higher with panic. You don't have any income, Dad. Mom makes $280 a week. How exactly are we going to pay back $27,000? The look he gave me said absolutely everything I needed to know about where this was heading, and my stomach dropped like I was on a roller coaster. Well, Derek, he said with this casual shrug, you're the one with the steady job and reliable income. No, absolutely not. I stood up so fast my chair almost fell over. I am not taking on debt for Brittany's wedding. I already told you I can't afford this. You don't have to take on the debt, Brittany said sweetly, examining her perfectly manicured nails like we were discussing the weather. Dad already did that part. You just have to help pay it back. As a family, I stared at her in complete disbelief, unable to process what I was hearing. You manipulated Dad into borrowing money that I'll have to pay back? Are you completely out of your mind? Nobody's forcing you to do anything, she said with an innocent shrug. But if you don't help out, everyone's going to know exactly what kind of brother you really are. The threat was crystal clear. Either pay for her wedding or be branded as a terrible person who abandoned his family in their time of need. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized that my family had essentially declared war on me. They'd taken on debt in my name without my consent, turned extended family members against me, and were now emotionally blackmailing me into compliance. But I had absolutely no idea how low they were willing to go until Brittany's engagement party 3 weeks later, when my grandfather made a request that would change everything forever. Brittany's engagement party was held at Brandon's family's house, and let me tell you, it was absolutely something else. This place was like something straight out of a luxury home magazine. A massive colonial-style mansion with a circular driveway, pristine white columns, perfectly manicured grounds that looked like they required a full-time landscaping crew, and a 4-car garage that probably cost more than most people's entire houses. Brandon's parents, Richard and Patricia, were clearly old money types who had the kind of serious wealth that goes back generations. The whole event probably cost more than I make in 4 months of backbreaking work. There was catered food from some high-end restaurant, professional bartenders, live music, and floral arrangements that looked like they belonged at a royal wedding. I almost didn't go to this thing, but my grandfather specifically asked me to be there, and he was one of the few family members I actually respected. Grandpa Vincent was my mom's dad, and he'd driven up all the way from Georgia where he'd been living since Grandma passed away 3 years ago. He was 76 years old, sharp as a tack mentally, and had always been my absolute favorite family member. Unlike everyone else in my family, he'd worked his entire life, building his own successful plumbing business from absolutely nothing. He'd never asked anyone for handouts, never expected other people to support him, and had always treated me with genuine respect and appreciation. The party itself was awkward as hell for me. Brittany was in full princess mode, floating around in this expensive dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, showing off to Brandon's family and friends about how perfect everything was going to be. She kept talking about the wedding plans in this breathless, excited way, dropping not-so-subtle hints about how elaborate and expensive everything would be. Brandon's parents were polite enough, but I could tell they were already starting to wonder what kind of family their son was marrying into. This was especially obvious when Dad started telling loud, rambling stories about his auto parts factory days and complaining bitterly about how the plant closure had ruined everything for hardworking people like himself. Mom was trying way too hard to impress everyone, complimenting every single thing about their house in this over-the-top way, and asking lots of personal questions about their background and business interests. What made the whole situation even worse was watching Brittany work the room like some kind of professional manipulator. She was completely different around Brandon's family, playing up this sweet, innocent act that I'd never seen before. She dropped subtle hints about how challenging it was planning such an elaborate wedding, and how important it was to have family support during times like this. I heard her tell Brandon's mom that some family members weren't being as supportive as she'd hoped, shooting me pointed looks across the room. She'd perfected this victim routine where she'd sigh dramatically and say things like, "I just hope everything works out," or "It's so important to have family support during times like this." Brandon's family seemed confused by these cryptic comments, but Brittany would just smile sweetly and change the subject, leaving them with the impression that there was some kind of serious family drama they didn't understand. Late in the evening, Grandpa Vincent pulled me aside to the back patio where it was quiet and we could talk privately. The house had this amazing outdoor space with professional landscaping and a beautiful view of the river running behind their property. But Grandpa seemed more interested in having a serious conversation than admiring the scenery. "Derek, you look stressed, son," he said, settling into one of their expensive patio chairs. "Is everything all right with you?" I gave him the complete story. The wedding demands, the impossible $48,000 price tag, the loan Dad had taken without consulting me, all the family pressure and manipulation tactics they were using. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally and asking clarifying questions that showed he was really paying attention to what I was saying. "Sounds like they're putting you in an absolutely impossible situation," he said when I finished explaining everything. "Your sister's always been spoiled, but this is something else entirely. This goes way beyond normal family expectations." "I just don't know what to do anymore, Grandpa," I admitted, feeling like a weight was lifting off my shoulders just from having someone actually listen to me. "If I don't help pay for this wedding, I'm the bad guy who ruined Brittany's dreams. But if I do help, I'll be completely broke for years trying to pay off their debt." He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the river with this thoughtful expression on his weathered face. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope that looked like it was stuffed with papers. "Derek, I need to ask you a favor," he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I just sold my condo in Georgia and got a really good price for it, $195,000 cash. I'm moving into a retirement community next month, but the paperwork and all the legal stuff won't be completely finished for another 3 weeks." He handed me the envelope, and I could immediately feel how thick and heavy it was. "This is $27,000 in cash, part of the money from the condo sale. I don't trust keeping this much money sitting in my checking account with all the fraud and identity theft that's happening these days. And I definitely can't risk carrying it back to Georgia on the plane. That's just asking for trouble." He looked at me with those kind, trusting eyes that reminded me of when I was a little kid. "Could you keep it safe for me until I'm ready to make the move? Just put it somewhere secure in your room where nobody will think to look for it." I didn't hesitate for even a single second. This was my grandfather, the one person in my family who'd always treated me with genuine respect and never asked me for anything unreasonable. He'd helped me get my HVAC license when I was starting out, given me advice about starting my own business, and was the only family member who seemed to truly understand how hard I worked and how much I sacrificed for everyone else. "Of course, Grandpa," I said immediately. "I'll keep it safe for you. You don't even need to worry about it." "I knew I could count on you," he said, patting my shoulder with his weathered hand in that gentle way he'd done since I was little. "You're the only one in this family with a good head on your shoulders, Derek. Don't let them break you down, son. You're worth more than they appreciate." That night, I took the envelope home and hid it carefully in my bedroom closet, inside an old toolbox behind some winter clothes where nobody would ever think to look for it. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not my parents, not Brittany, absolutely nobody. Grandpa had asked for discretion, and I wasn't going to let him down under any circumstances. I went to sleep that night feeling genuinely good about finally being able to help someone in my family without it costing me anything personally. Grandpa needed a simple favor, and I was happy to do it for him. He'd always been there for me when I needed support, and now I could be there for him in return. If I had known what my father was planning to do, I would have slept with that money under my pillow with a loaded shotgun next to my bed. Over the next few days, I started noticing that Dad was acting strange, more agitated and restless than usual. He was making hushed phone calls that he'd abruptly end whenever I walked into the room, and I caught him going through papers and documents in his bedroom late at night with the door only partially closed. When I asked what was wrong or if everything was okay, he'd brush me off with vague answers like, "Just wedding stuff," or "trying to figure out the finances." I should have known something was seriously up. I should have recognized the warning signs and put 2 and 2 together, but I was so focused on work and trying to avoid the constant wedding drama that I didn't piece it together until it was way too late. 4 days after the engagement party, my entire world came crashing down around me. I woke up on Saturday morning to the sound of Brittany's voice downstairs, high-pitched and more excited than I'd heard her in weeks. She was talking to someone on the phone about finalizing the catering arrangements and making the last payment to the venue coordinator. I checked my phone. It was 11:15 a.m. I'd actually slept in for once since I didn't have any HVAC jobs scheduled for the weekend, which was a rare luxury in my line of work. Something about her tone really bothered me, though. She sounded way too happy, like someone who had just solved a major problem that had been weighing on them for weeks. I had this terrible, sinking feeling in my gut that I couldn't shake off. I decided to go to my closet to grab some clothes for the day, and while I was there, something made me decide to check on Grandpa's money. Better safe than sorry, right? Just a quick check to make sure everything was still secure. I moved aside the winter coats, opened up the old toolbox, and reached inside where I'd carefully placed the envelope. My hand found nothing but empty space. My heart completely stopped beating for a moment. I dumped everything out of the toolbox onto the floor, checked every single corner of the closet, looked under my bed, in my dresser drawers, even in places I knew I definitely hadn't put it. Nothing. The envelope with $27,000 was completely gone. I ran downstairs still in my pajamas, probably looking like an absolute maniac, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Brittany was still on the phone in the kitchen, but when she saw the expression on my face, she quickly said, "I'll call you back," and hung up immediately. "Where's my money?" I demanded, my voice shaking with panic and rage. She gave me this perfectly innocent look that made me want to scream at the top of my lungs. "What money?" "The money from my closet, $27,000. Where the hell is it?" Dad walked in from the living room at that exact moment, and I could tell immediately from his expression that he knew exactly what I was talking about. There was something guilty and defiant in his eyes, like a child who'd been caught stealing cookies but wasn't sorry about it. "Oh, that money," he said with this casual tone, like we were discussing what to have for lunch. "I took it last night." "You what?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The room felt like it was spinning around me. "Derek, calm down," he said in this patronizing voice. "I know you've been hiding money from the family, and frankly, I'm really disappointed in you. Your sister needed help with her wedding, and you refused to be supportive, so I took matters into my own hands and did what needed to be done." I literally couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like I was having some kind of nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. "Dad, that money wasn't mine. It belongs to Grandpa Vincent. He asked me to keep it safe for him." He actually laughed. Like I'd just told him the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "Come on, Derek. Stop making up ridiculous stories. Your grandfather doesn't have that kind of cash just lying around. I know you've been saving up money for months, probably planning to move out and abandon your family when we need you most." "I'm not lying." I was practically screaming now. "He sold his condo in Georgia and asked me to keep the money safe until he moves to the retirement home in 3 weeks. Brittany rolled her eyes dramatically like I was some kind of pathetic child throwing a tantrum. "Derek, just admit you had savings and you didn't want to help with the wedding. It's really not that big a deal anymore. The money's already spent anyway, so there's no point in making up stories." "Spent?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "What do you mean it's already spent?" Dad pulled out his phone and showed me his banking app with way too much satisfaction and pride. "I deposited it this morning, paid off Jim's loan completely, and gave Brittany the rest for the final wedding expenses. Everything's taken care of now. Problem solved." I felt like the floor had completely disappeared beneath my feet and I was falling into some kind of endless void. "Dad, that money has to be paid back in 3 weeks when Grandpa comes to get it. He needs it for his retirement home deposit." "Then you better start saving up fast," Brittany said with this cruel smirk that made my skin crawl. "Or maybe you can finally take out that loan you should have gotten in the first place instead of being so selfish." I stared at her, really looked at her, and saw something that absolutely chilled me to the bone. She wasn't just entitled or spoiled anymore. She was genuinely cruel, with no empathy or conscience whatsoever. She knew perfectly well that money didn't belong to me, and she didn't care even a little bit. She was perfectly happy to let me take the blame and figure out how to replace stolen money. "You're both completely insane," I said, my voice barely controlled and shaking with rage. "That money belongs to Grandpa Vincent. When he finds out what you did," "What I did?" Dad's voice got hard and defensive. "I didn't do anything wrong here, Derek. You had money, your sister needed help, and I helped her. That's what families do for each other." Before I could respond, I heard the front door opening and closing. It was Grandpa Vincent's cheerful voice calling out, "Hello, everyone." He was arriving earlier than expected for his planned visit. The color immediately drained from Dad's face like he'd seen a ghost. Brittany looked like she was about to throw up. Grandpa walked into the kitchen with his usual warm smile, wearing his typical weekend outfit of clean khakis and a polo shirt, and carrying a small overnight bag. But his smile faded quickly when he saw our expressions and the obvious tension in the room. "Is everything all right, Derek?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. "You look really upset about something." I felt like I was about to throw up right there on the kitchen floor. How do you tell your 76-year-old grandfather that your own father just stole his life savings to pay for your sister's ridiculously expensive wedding? The words were stuck in my throat, and I couldn't figure out how to make them come out. Grandpa, I started, but couldn't finish the sentence. What about the money, son? His voice was getting more serious now, taking on that authoritative tone I remembered from when I was a kid, and he meant business. I couldn't find the words. I felt like the biggest failure in the world, like I'd let down the one person in my family who had always trusted me and treated me with respect. Dad stepped forward, trying to look confident but failing miserably. You could see the guilt and panic written all over his face. Dad, there's been a bit of a misunderstanding here. Where's my money, Derek? Grandpa's voice was deadly serious now, the way it used to get when I was little and had done something really wrong. Dad took it, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. I felt like a traitor, but I couldn't lie to my grandfather's face. He thought it was mine. He spent it on Brittany's wedding. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that kitchen. Grandpa Vincent looked at Dad with an expression I'd never seen before in my entire life. Pure disappointment mixed with growing rage and complete disbelief. Robert, he said slowly, his voice trembling with controlled fury, please tell me I didn't hear what I think I just heard. Dad, I can explain everything, my father started, his voice shaking with panic. But Grandpa held up his weathered hand to stop him. $27,000, Robert. That was everything I had left after the condo sale. I need that exact money for the retirement home deposit on Tuesday, or I lose my spot and end up on a waiting list for 3 years. 3 years, Robert. Brittany, showing exactly what kind of person she really was deep down, chose that moment to open her mouth and speak up. Well, maybe you shouldn't have been keeping so much cash lying around like that. That's kind of irresponsible for someone your age, don't you think? The look Grandpa gave her could have melted steel beams. I've never seen an elderly man look so angry and disappointed at the same time. Then he turned back to Dad, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never witnessed before, complete and total disappointment in his own son. You have exactly 72 hours to return every single penny, Robert, he said, his voice trembling with barely controlled rage. If you don't have that money back to me by Tuesday morning, I'm pressing criminal charges for theft and filing a civil lawsuit against you for everything you're worth. He looked at me with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen. I'm sorry, Derek. I know this isn't your fault, and I should never have put you in this position. Then he turned around and walked straight out of the house, leaving us standing there in complete stunned silence. Dad collapsed into a kitchen chair like his legs had given out, finally starting to realize the full magnitude of what he'd done. But instead of taking responsibility for his terrible decision or showing any remorse, he looked up at me with pure hatred burning in his eyes. This is all your fault, he said, his voice shaking with rage and desperation. If you had just helped your sister like a normal, caring brother would have, none of this would have happened. You forced me into this situation. That was the exact moment I realized that my family was completely beyond saving. They were never going to change, never going to appreciate what I'd done for them, and never going to take responsibility for their own actions. And that was when I decided they were going to pay dearly for what they'd done to me and to my grandfather. I moved out that very same day. I took only what I could fit in my pickup truck, my clothes, some personal items, my tools, and my work equipment. I found a cheap studio apartment across town and signed a lease that afternoon. I didn't say goodbye to any of them, didn't leave a note explaining where I was going, didn't give them my new address or phone number. I just disappeared completely while they were out dealing with the crisis they'd created. For the next 3 weeks, I went completely no contact with all of them. I changed my phone number, blocked them on all social media platforms, and ignored the extended family members who kept calling my work number to ask what was happening and why I wasn't returning calls. I wanted to see exactly how they'd handle their first real taste of consequences without me there to fix everything and bail them out of their problems. The wedding was supposed to happen that Saturday. On Friday night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Brandon, and he sounded absolutely exhausted and disgusted. Derek, this is Brandon Clearwater, Brittany's fiancé. We really need to talk. About what? I asked, genuinely curious about what he wanted. About the fact that your family has been lying to me for months about everything. The wedding's completely off, man. I found out about the money situation, and honestly, what kind of people are they? It turns out that Grandpa Vincent had done exactly what he'd promised to do. When Dad couldn't come up with the money by Tuesday, Grandpa filed theft charges with the police and a civil lawsuit in court. But more importantly, from Brandon's perspective, Grandpa had told Brandon's family exactly what had happened, how Dad had stolen money from an elderly man to pay for the wedding, and how Brittany had not only encouraged it, but actually mocked Grandpa afterward. My parents were absolutely horrified, Brandon continued. They said that anyone who would steal from their own elderly father isn't the kind of family they want to be associated with. And Brittany, man, when I confronted her about everything, she didn't even seem sorry about any of it. She just kept saying it wasn't her fault and that you should have paid for the wedding in the first place. So what happens now? I asked. I'm completely done with her, he said firmly. I already got the engagement ring back and canceled everything I possibly could cancel. She's not who I thought she was, Derek. She's actually kind of a terrible person underneath all that makeup and fake sweetness. That conversation felt like the first genuinely good news I'd had in months. Over the next few weeks, I watched from a distance as my family's world completely fell apart. And I have to admit, it was incredibly satisfying to see them finally face real consequences for their actions. Dad got arrested and formally charged with elder abuse and theft, serious felony charges that could result in prison time. The story actually made it into the local newspaper because of the dollar amount involved and the particularly disgusting nature of the crime. The headline read something like, "Local man steals $27,000 from elderly father to fund daughter's wedding." In a small town like ours, that kind of publicity is absolutely devastating. Mom had to take on extra shifts at the department store, working practically every day of the week. But she still couldn't even come close to covering the mortgage payments without my income supporting the household. The financial reality of their situation hit them like a freight train. For years, they'd taken my financial support completely for granted, never really understanding or appreciating how much money it takes to run a household. Brittany's social media went from constant wedding planning posts and excited updates to complete radio silence overnight. One day, she was posting about dress fittings and flower arrangements, and the next day, her accounts went completely dark. Word got around quickly about what had happened. You know how it is in small towns where everyone knows everyone else's business. Her reputation was completely destroyed, and she couldn't show her face anywhere without people talking and whispering about how she'd encouraged her father to steal from her own grandfather. The wedding venue, caterer, florist, and band all demanded immediate payment for services that had been canceled at the last minute. Brittany had racked up thousands of dollars in additional debt that nobody in the family could possibly pay. Her credit score was completely ruined, and Brandon's family made absolutely sure that everyone in their social circle knew exactly why the wedding had been called off and what kind of people they were dealing with. But the real karma came about 3 months later when I got another unexpected phone call that would show me just how far they'd all fallen. This time, it was Mom calling, and I could hear the complete desperation and panic in her voice before she even started talking. "Derek, please, we really need to talk," she said, and I could tell she'd been crying. "Can you please come over to the house just once? We're in serious trouble here." "I don't think that's a good idea," I replied calmly. "Please, son, we're in real trouble. I mean real serious trouble this time." Against my better judgment and every instinct telling me to stay away, I decided to drive over to the house one evening to see what they wanted. What I found when I got there was both devastating and exactly what they deserved after everything they'd put me through. The house was an absolute mess, worse than I'd ever seen it. There were dirty dishes piled up everywhere, trash bags sitting by the door that clearly hadn't been taken out in weeks, and the whole place had this musty smell like nobody had been cleaning regularly. The utilities were obviously behind on payments because some of the lights weren't working properly. The front lawn was completely overgrown with weeds. The paint was peeling off the exterior walls, and one of the gutters was hanging loose and looked like it might fall off at any moment. Mom looked like she'd aged 15 years in just a few months. She had dark circles under her eyes, gray roots showing in her hair that she clearly couldn't afford to get touched up, and she'd lost weight in an unhealthy way. Brittany was sitting on the couch in old sweatpants and a stained t-shirt. No makeup, hair unwashed, looking like a completely different person from the princess who had demanded a $48,000 wedding just months earlier. "Derek?" Mom started crying the second she saw me walk through the door. "Thank God you're here. We don't know what to do anymore. Everything's falling apart." "Where's Dad?" I asked, looking around the disaster zone that used to be a decent home. "Jail," Brittany said bitterly. not even bothering to look up from her phone. 8-month sentence, plus he has to pay Grandpa back every penny with interest. We had to get a public defender because we can't afford a real lawyer. I looked around the house that I'd been paying for since I was 20 years old, seeing the complete deterioration that had happened in just a few months without my financial support. "What do you want from me?" I asked directly. "We're going to lose the house," Mom sobbed, pressing her hands to her face. "I can't make the mortgage payments on just my salary. We're already 4 months behind, and the bank sent us a foreclosure notice last week. We need your help, Derek. Please. We're desperate." Brittany finally looked up at me, and for the first time in her entire life, I saw genuine desperation and fear in her eyes instead of that entitled smugness I was so used to. "Derek, I made a terrible mistake," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm really sorry about everything. I didn't think about what would happen to everyone else. I was selfish and stupid." "You didn't think, period," I said coldly, feeling absolutely no sympathy for her situation. "What happened to Brandon taking care of you?" I asked. "What happened to never having to worry about money again because you were smart enough to find a man who could provide?" Her face completely crumpled at the mention of Brandon's name. "He left me. He called off the wedding, took back the ring, canceled everything. And now nobody will even consider dating me because everyone in town knows what happened from the newspaper article. I can't even get a job anywhere because every place I apply, someone recognizes my name and knows the whole story." "That's really unfortunate," I said, without an ounce of genuine sympathy in my voice. "Please," Mom begged, getting down on her knees right there in the living room. "We'll do absolutely anything. Brittany will get a job, any job. I'll work even more hours. We'll pay you back every single penny. Just please help us save the house." I looked at these two women who had made my life absolutely miserable for years, who had called me selfish and ungrateful when I was supporting them, who had stolen from my grandfather and expected me to fix their problems. I thought about all the years I'd sacrificed my own dreams and financial security to keep them comfortable. All the times they'd taken my help completely for granted and demanded even more from me. "No," I said simply and calmly. "What?" Brittany's voice cracked with disbelief. I said no. Figure it out yourselves. Get jobs, downsize your lifestyle, move in with relatives, apply for government assistance. Do what normal people do when they can't afford their current situation. But I'm not helping you anymore." "But we're family," Mom cried desperately. "Family?" I almost laughed out loud. "You mean like how Dad treated his family when he stole from Grandpa? Like how Brittany treated her family when she mocked an old man for losing his life savings?" I headed toward the door, then turned back one final time to say what I'd been wanting to say for months. "You know what's really funny about this whole situation? If you had just asked me for help with a reasonable wedding, maybe $6,000 or $8,000, I probably would have said yes eventually. But you got completely greedy. You wanted everything handed to you without any sacrifice or compromise on your part. And when I said no, you decided to take it anyway by stealing from an elderly man." Brittany was crying now, her makeup running down her face in black streaks. "Derek, please, I'll do anything. I'll get 4 jobs if I have to. Just please don't let us lose everything. You already lost everything," I said quietly, looking at the pathetic scene in front of me. "The day you decided I was an ATM machine instead of your brother." I walked out of that house and never looked back.